I introduced Professor Peled and her work already briefly yesterday. So if you don't mind, we could get started right away. We only have 45 minutes and then we move to the subject of Libya. So I would like to ask you to comprise your presentation a little bit so that we can have it also with a few questions and answers in the time available. I explained to you already the group, the background of the students. I'm extremely happy that we have Professor Peled here as our guest. She is giving a lecture tour concerning her new book, Palestine in Israeli School Books. It is very important not only for the subject it deals with, but the more general subject that I talked about, the difficulty of reconciliation and changing people's image of each other and how they talk about each other or sometimes completely ignore each other and ignore the underlying tensions. So, Professor Peled, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. I understand you got an overview of the Israeli-Palestinian situation yesterday, and you know it all. But if you have any questions, please interrupt me and ask. All right. So this is the name of the book, part of it. And the books are mainstream Israeli school books that were published after the Oslo Agreement. When I say mainstream, it means mainstream secular school, because we have a lot of streams. State, secular, state, religious, independent religious, this and that. So these are the majority mainstream secular books. In the book you have the analysis of 5 geography school books, 10 history and 1 civic studies, which is also studied in the Arab schools in Israel, just translated from Hebrew to Arab. This is the epitaph of the book, which I think applies to not only to big conflicts, but to each and everyone, everywhere. A quote from Richard Dawkins, who writes a lot. On top of being a scientist, he writes a lot about the viruses of the mind and mind infection. So I took this quote from him. In the state of Israel, there is no conflict resolution studies, no peace education at schools. Yesterday we met an Israeli girl who came here to study conflict resolution because she couldn't study it in Israel. Nobody is interested officially in these things. On the contrary, there are a lot of private enterprises by schools and movements and groups and organizations and NGOs that do that, but not an official program by the universities or Ministry of Education has ever been issued. My theoretical ground, you come from, I don't know really what you come from, but my book is not written by a historian. This is not the important point of the book. I don't verify the facts, whether they are right or not. This is not the point. The point is to see how things are represented to students. All right? So the main area is social semiotics, which means the study of signs, any sign, written, visual, spoken, whatever, in context, in social context. The idea is that every sign receives its meaning in context and also gives meaning to context. Okay, I'll just give you a small example. In Israel, when somebody earns something important in the world and he is half or quarter or third or fourth Jewish, it will be advertised in all the papers. If they did it here or in France, it would have been racism, or considered racism, to say he's third Jew. But in Israel, it's a source of pride, so it's always mentioned, and it's not considered a racist expression. critical discourse analysis, racism studies, that most of them come from Holland really, and literary theory for the analysis of texts. So you see, it really comprises, it's supradisciplinary. When you finish your studies and you really start investigating the world, you see that all the disciplines are getting back together. Especially when you analyze discourse. Okay. The idea of social semiotics is that every sign we make in order to make meaning, that we are busy all our lives in making meaning of what surrounds us, of what we experience, and every sign we make is motivated. Motivated does not mean intentional, but when you live in a certain culture, in a certain discourse, in a certain environment, with certain interests and beliefs, everything you do is based on that. Those motivations have to do also with what we want to say to someone at this particular moment in this particular place. So the questions we ask about text analysis is, first of all, what does the text say? And then what does it say with what it says to this particular audience, in this particular time, in this particular environment? We ask, who is involved in the creation of the text, in the reading of the text, for what purpose, what roles, what power, in what environment, and so on. This gives genre or form or style to any text. So when we speak about textbooks, in Israel we can say a Jewish government that wants to raise Jewish children to be good soldiers in a reality of occupation of another nation. How do you do that? Okay, so the whole system of education is recruited for that purpose, to produce good soldiers that will carry on the practices of occupation. How do you do that? You have to do something to set minds of people in a certain way, so they would agree to do that, and agree to do that without too much questioning. When I started studying textbooks, I was confronted immediately with racism, and then I went to study racist discourse from all angles, from discourse, from sociology and psychology, whatever. And I saw that Israeli books really correspond to all the categories of racist discourse when they represent Palestinians. Not only, because within the Jewish community you also have a lot of ethnicities that have nothing to do with each other except they're being Jewish, which is not much. And there's a lot of racism, institutionalized and everyday racism, that is involved in the relationships, both official and non-official, within this Jewish group also. But now we're talking about Palestinians. This man, Van Leeuwenthal, he's Dutch. He works in Australia now, but he did his a lot of study about Dutch textbooks and advertisements. And he came up with these 5 strategies of depicting people as others. So first of all, you depict them as agents of actions that have low esteem in the society, whether they are subservient or evil or whatever. The most dominant strategies is just to exclude them and not to mention them at all. This happens a lot in Israel, in Israeli life, and in Israeli education, and in Israeli culture. Arab citizens, who are 20% of the populations, are not part of anything. Culture, economic, education, whatever. They're just excluded from the mind, from the discourse, from the books, everything. They're always shown as a homogeneous group. You always talk about the Arabs or the Arab, like in other places. You will talk about the Jews or the Jew. The Jew is, the Jews are. Here, I suppose you will have the same thing with people who come here. The Moroccans are. And So they're not individualized, and you lose the capacity of seeing them as individuals. This is what happens. Once they are marked as part of a group with certain negative features, it's very hard to individualize them and see them as individuals. And you emphasize negative cultural connotations and negative racial stereotypes. For example, when people speak against Islam, they immediately come up with girl circumcision, which is not an Islamic thing. It's just something that some group who happen to be Muslim do. When they speak about, I don't know, Jews, they would speak about a big nose. Okay, so these are the things. Turks have mustache and so on. In Israeli education has to legitimate somehow and explain the fact that Palestinians are treated as what, you know, from Agamben as homo sacer, I think it's homini sacer in plural. Namely, people who have no human rights at all, who are treated as bare life, and whose murder is never punished, is never even considered, okay? Whose blood is dispensable with impunity. And they have to present this as necessity of the democratic state of Israel, okay? I say democratic state of Israel because researchers who really address this question do not define Israel as a democracy, but as an ethnocracy, meaning one ethnicity dominates other ethnicities, or ethnic democracy, and so on and so forth. In school books, Israel is defined as a defensive democracy, a democracy that has to defend itself against terror. And thereby all these things are legitimated. Okay, yes?
Is there any, I understand that it's not right to do it in that degree to take away all human rights, but is there any substance to the defence policy? I mean, is there a serious threat from Palestinians, so to speak?
I will not speak about that. As I told you, I'm speaking about the representation of this. Arabs are represented, and I will show you later, as threat. And this is a given. Nobody discusses it. This is it. If you come from a religious point of view, they are Amalek, I mean all the enemies. If you come from secular point of view, then of course they want our country, they want this, they are terrorists, and so on and so forth. It's very easy to build. If you ask me personally if they constitute a real threat, of course not. They have no army, no weapons, nothing. Yes, but this is not the issue. All right? So here I come. All the books in Israel are private industry, but they have to be authorized by the ministry, and therefore they have to have some common ground, ideological common ground, or they are not authorized. This common ground is made of these assumptions. For example, there is anti-Semitism. All the non-Jews are potential anti-Semitist, and are a threat. Jewish historical rights on the land of Israel, Palestine. So as long as they are there, they are a threat. They fled the country, they abandoned the country, so they don't really deserve to come back. And they are Arabs, so they have 22 other countries they can go to. We only have one, etc., etc. Palestinian citizens constitute a demographic problem, or a demographic threat, or a demographic demon, all kinds of expressions. And in the occupied territories, they are all potential terrorists, no matter what age, and they must be controlled at all times. We must have, at all costs, the Jewish majority and Israeli control. Okay? So when this is your main goal, various governments, left or right, differ only on the means or on the extent of their frankness regarding the means to keep the Jewish majority. So Palestinians, as I said, I seldom depicted at all. When they are depicted, it's just as negative stereotypes and never as individuals. For example, if you have a book about society in Israel, they are not included in any way, except as threat. I found a book now, a new book that came out of something like civic studies, and the only time they mention Arabs is in a chapter about the rights of majorities versus the rights of minorities. And there's a question, you heard about a principal, an Arab principal, who wouldn't have his pupils sing the national anthem. What would you have done? And this is the only thing in Arab is mentioned. Okay, so it's some kind of... So they are always represented as the refugee problem, Asiatic backwardness, demographic problem, and security threat. I'll give you some examples. The Arab society is traditional and object to changes by its nature, reluctant to adopt novelties, modernization seems dangerous to them. They are unwilling to give anything up for the general good. So this is characterization of a whole population in a geography book. It goes on. In the Jewish sector, there is no objection to allocate some of the private lands for public building. In the Arab sector, there is an expectation that all public services and needs be provided from the land reservoir of the state. Now, what is the land reservoir of the state, which is called state lands? These are the lands confiscated from the Arabs. So the fact that they don't want to have more land confiscated means that they are not very good citizens. Oren Iftach-El is a political geographer, and he wrote a very important book called Ethnocracy, where he really explains what ethnocracy means and how Israel is an ethnocracy. And he said settler states are usually ethnocracies, and they regard the native land as their property, and they can do anything they want with it. And this is what happens in Israel. Every time they decide, I don't know what, they just take the land away. Whether inside the state or outside the borders of the state, in the territories. Just now we have a new law that permits a posteriori the settlers who stole land from Palestinians anyway to have stolen it. Okay? So the law just came out and everybody is protected. Okay. So everything they build is illegal because they have never received from the establishment of the State of Israel, they have and not one permit was issued to Arabs to build either individually or municipally. Never. So what do? How do you go on? How do you build for the children? How do you build for the village? So everything they build is illegal, and the fact of house demolishing, you probably know, is very widespread in Israel, and there is also the committee ICAD, the International Committee Against House Demolishing, which has never succeeded to prevent the demolition of any house. But what they do, they recruit young, good people like you in the summer to rebuild houses that were demolished. And this happens all the time. Okay. They are also thieves. They steal water from us in Ramallah, although Ramallah is not even in Israel. And these are just little quotes. So if the land is ours, who are they? They are foreign workers, foreign labor, like Chinese, Thailandese, all those people who come from all over the world. Sri Lanka, we have a lot, Romania, same. Now I'll go a little bit on features of racist discourse that are used in Israeli school books. One is impersonalization, which means calling people by an abstract noun that does not have the factor human in it. For example, problem. We know the Jews were called in Nazi Germany the Jewish problem. Okay, a problem that must be solved. Palestinians are called in Israeli school books the Palestinian problem. And as you see, this problem matured like a plague. It doesn't have any human agency or cause that made it. It's by itself. A chapter that talks about Palestinians really is going to talk about the attitudes within the Israeli public regarding the problem and the character of its, I wouldn't say final because they don't say that, but solution. This is very, very disturbing to see in a Jewish book. Such, for me, such phrasing. This is the Palestinian problem. As you see, no people. It's an environmental problem, ecological problem, okay? Lots of mosquitoes and I don't know what. So it makes it a universal problem. It makes it easy to identify. A lot of Europeans would identify with that, yes? Those people who come from those countries, this is how they live. This problem is a poisonous problem, as you see. Palestinian problem would poison for more the relationship of Israel with the outside world. All the time, as you see, this problem is really like a plague. It acts by itself, independently of any context. In this book, they explain to us that if we annex the West Bank with the people, because in the West Bank, Palestinians live, as I told you, with no human rights, no civil rights, because they don't belong to the state. They live in permanent military regime. Everything they do is solved by the military, education, economy, anything. So he explains that annexing the West Bank will make the Zionist dream turn into a South African nightmare. And this was written in 2000, so it's after the victory of Mandela, when you wouldn't say that in other places, even if you thought that. Another feature is what we call genericization. All the others are the same. So in Israel, all the others are Arabs. It doesn't matter that half of them are not Arabs, but you know, when I gave a lecture in the publishing house where they published these books, and they say, you know, we didn't have enough room on the page, so starting explaining about everyone is really tedious. Let's do it this way. Yeah. In Israel, there are something called mitzpim, which is observation spots, outposts, built on hilltops overlooking Arab villages. And this is what the book says was the reason for it, to prevent an illegal invasion of non-Jewish population. Those illegal invaders are the citizens of the states. They should have the right to live wherever they want. But the prime ideal of the state of Israel is Judaization of the whole area. So this was in the context of a project called To Jewify the Galilee. When they long to go back to their homes, they long to go back to the land of Israel and not to the land of Palestine. Because there is no land of Palestine. The whole area is the land of Israel. They are represented, as I said, as terrorists. Here you see children terrorists. I don't know if you know, but Israel doesn't make any distinction between adults and children when it comes to Palestinians. In the last 2 years, 7,000 children were brutally arrested. And when I say brutally, I mean snatched from their beds at night and interrogated and incarcerated and brought to trial just like grown-ups. There's a very famous story about a little boy who is brought to trial, and they dress them in uniform, so they look like real terrorists. And the sleeves went up to here, and he couldn't walk because the pants were too long. And there's a very known lawyer in Israel, Leah Tzemel, who has been working for the Palestinians for the last 40 years. She always has balloons in her bag. Whenever she sees these children, she blows the balloon and she gives it to them. And it draws a lot of attention. Right now, we have almost 400 children in jail. Refugees, primitive farmers. You see, there's nothing Arab about him, but this is the symbol of non-Jewishness, all right? And empty, horrible places where they live. This is a part of a chapter talking about refugees all over the world, but for all the other the refugees, you see human beings. You have a map of their wanderings and a story of how they became refugees. And suddenly you see this, no story, no map, nothing. Van Leuven says about such aerial photograph, and he talks about Dutch books, the way they represent the third world. But I took it to this one because I think it fits. The angle of the pilot who flies too high to be able to see the people on whom he's dropping the bombs. And he said this is what education is really is still primarily concerned to reproduce, because if the pilot would see Jabalia, he would see that when he's bombing, or that, or that. And this is very inefficient in education. Another way to represent them is by racist icons. Van Leuven has an article which is called Visual Racism, based on an exhibition that was presented in Amsterdam about the history of racist advertisements in Europe and America. Very interesting. And on this exhibition, they published a book with a taxonomy of racist icons all over the world, and he wrote the article. Now, as you see, this man, he doesn't look like anybody anywhere. It's an imaginary model of an Arab taken from some, I don't know, European painter who had his imagination, and some Alibaba. Yeah. But nobody looks like that. And for Israeli children, if you can imagine, this represents the neighbor that lives there, over there, who may be their doctor, the dentist, the neurologist, the teacher. Okay? Again, here in this map of spread of settlements of Arabs, you see that those Arabs are put in Jordan, so that visually we understand they don't belong really where they live. On the other side of this page, we see that Jews coming to Israel, walking straight into the West Bank. Their plane is covering the Golan Heights, and the flag of Israel covers Gaza. So the two pages are what we call in semiotics a complex sign. They form one sign that says something together. This is an Arab woman, if you didn't know. And again, here it's lovely because this diagram shows you something about ages. So the first group is normal people. I mean, they're funny, but they're not particularly Jewish. And you say, here it says Jews and others, versus the racist icons here, Arabs. And the question is, who are the others if the Arabs are called non-Jews? The book does not explain, but the children get the idea that there are some people who are not Jewish, but they deserve to be with us because they are not Arabs. And I checked it in the registrar, and there really is such a group. Although the book doesn't explain, there is such a book which refers to the Russians that are brought from Russia to Israel, supposedly as Jews, and they are not Jews. So they are called others. But here the book doesn't explain anything, you just have to suppose that. Yeah? If you're blonde enough, then you deserve to be with us. The title is Palestinians from Refugees to a Nation, and right away you see this very known picture of Israeli victims of a terrorist attack. Whenever you say Palestinian, the connotation must be terror. Otherwise they're called Arabs. The Arabs of Israel, which is demeaning enough. Yes, the Arabs of Israel, or the Arabs of the land of Israel. Okay? But when the label Palestinian comes up, it must have the connotation of terror. In this graph, we see Israel as the last one in a row of developed countries, thanks to a little asterisk that says Israeli data refer only to the Jewish population, which is scientifically unacceptable, but as you see, it was taken from an American journal, Human Development Report, so they accepted it. They accepted the fact that a state gives statistics of its population minus 20%. I don't know if you have these horrible national tests of literacy and math and all this. We have them. It's a horrible thing, you know, it destroys school altogether. But it really comes to test the teachers, not the children. So a lot of teachers say to the weak children, you stay at home tomorrow. So that's the same thing, you know. We want to be developed, so you go away. I'll show you some maps. In Israel, all the maps are line maps because they don't show the international border. here it's a population map again, and this part, which is Palestine, the West Bank, is depicted as part of the state of Israel for which there is no data, which means no people. It is waiting to be inhabited. Okay? And this is really funny because if you know something about the area, you would know that every soldier in every checkpoint know exactly who they are, how much they are, and so on. Here's another one. And the reason for that is that the educational system could not succumb to the idea of having the West Bank and Gaza under any other sovereignty. And you have these maps everywhere in Israel, in banks, in hospitals, in leaflets, whatever. You have the greater state of Israel, the greater land. Now, if we ask what does the text say with what it says, which is the main question of text analysis, then we say these maps as texts say to the children of Israel, international law and international decisions don't matter to us, do not apply to us. And this explains a lot of things about Israel, because people always ask me, but it goes against international law. Nobody cares. Okay, these are not laws for us, because of course they are made by non-Jews. Non-Jews are anti-Semitic, we know that. This map is for 5th grade in a book called The Mediterranean Country, and the name of the double spread is one sea with many names. But instead of the names of the Mediterraneans, you have here biblical phrases that reiterate the divine promise to give Abraham, who is our father, not your father, the whole area. Okay? And the title of the map is this, with translation to modern Hebrew, in case you didn't get it. Okay? And again, as you see, no international borders, nothing at all. Mental maps. Mental maps are very important in the formation of identity, especially today when we really live by representations. As Baudrillard says, the territory doesn't exist anymore, only the map exists. So Arab villages are far from the center. They are so far from the center that they were kept out of modernization, and it's very hard to connect them to electricity and water networks. You would think they speak about Australia, but they speak about this. This is Israel. It was issued by the Foreign Ministry to show the world how threatened we are by our neighbors. And at the largest point, the width of Israel is 50 kilometers. So where exactly are those very, very remote, undeveloped villages? Especially when the Jewish settlements here in Palestine are considered very high quality and standard of life. But again, children don't ask these questions. The last thing I want to talk about is how books legitimate massacres. I don't know how your books legitimate your massacres all over the world, but it may seem like a very brave educational act to do that. To admit there were massacres and to explain them. So there are 3 massacres. There were lots of massacres, but most of them were authorized by the leadership or by the government, so they are not discussed. These are still debated. And they are justified, although they are not ratified, which means nobody says how lovely we killed them. I mean, some books do say, yeah, but they are not interested to analyze before they say it. How jolly that we killed more of them than they killed of us. But these books, the mainstream books, don't say that. It just said it was unfortunate, but given the circumstances, we can legitimate it. They legitimate it by referring to authority, either law or tradition or people of authority. Even the commander said that so-and-so. Moral evaluation, they call these actions many times punitive actions, for example, or appropriate response to hostility. Rationalization, they legitimate them by their consequences. Okay, Oedipus killed his father, but he saved the city. and mythopoiesis, which is this kind exactly of mythological narrative that gives you this kind of logic. Although he committed a crime, something good came out of it. So I'll give you an example. The Yasin massacre happened in 1948. It was a friendly village which had an agreement with the Jews of non-violence and was carried out. But in the plan of some of the militia in Israel, it had to be cleansed because it was on the way to Jerusalem, and the idea was to have a clean and Arab road to Jerusalem. So they came in the night and just killed everybody. And it's still debated today. I mean, because a lot of people were shocked and said they shouldn't have done that. So the legitimation is that the rumors about this massacre made the Arabs flee the land. And this was our salvation, because this enabled us to establish a state with a Jewish majority. Okay? Kibbia massacre, 53 of, after the establishment of the state, the border separated farmers from their fields, and they would come to their fields. Some of them came for revenge, but most of them came for their fields, and the books say that. But then there was a murder of a woman and 2 children, so Ariel Sharon, who was later our prime minister, formed a unit of vicious killers or wonderful heroes, and they just went across the border and took revenge. So they demolished the whole village on their inhabitants, village that had nothing to do with the murder. Okay? The legitimation is that it brought about some confidence to Jews in their homes and restored the moral and dignity of the idea. Okay, this is the legitimation. Kafar Qasim, 56, Israel invades Egypt with France and Britain together. In order to divert attention from what is going to happen, they pretend they are going to invade Jordan. The idea was to advance the curfew of Arab citizens, because Arab citizens always lived under curfew, in 2 hours without telling anybody, to kill people who don't come home on time. This will frighten the others. They will all flee to Jordan. We will close the border. Baruch Shabbatanu. And good riddance. It didn't happen. Most commanders did not obey the order. But one did, and 49 women and children were killed in Kafar Qasim. The judge said it was a manifestly unlawful order, a term coined in Nuremberg against the Nazis, and Israel is very proud that when we do something wrong, we are not afraid to apply Nazi verdicts against the Nazis to our Jewish soldiers. Okay? Even during Gaza, the Minister of Education suddenly declared that everybody has to learn about Kafar Qasim to tell the children how moral we are. Okay? Okay. This is one example of legitimating Deir Yassin by effect. Although it did not inaugurate the massive escape of Israel's Arabs, which had started before, it had nevertheless accelerated it greatly. The escape of the Arabs solved an awesome demographic problem, and even a moderate person such as the first president, Weizmann, spoke about it as a miracle. So it was for the best. What do we learn from? Explanations are really pathetic. The loudspeaker didn't work, so they didn't hear us telling them to leave, so we had to kill them. Or the soldiers did not know the people were hiding in their homes that night. Okay, usually they go to the disco, but this night they decided to sleep. This is what we call multimodal legitimation, when you have these pictures of glorious heroes, which have all the object signs of role models in Israel. You see the boots are boots of paratroopers. The beret is beret of paratroopers, and this is the highest role models in Israel. You have here Ariel Sharon, who became prime minister. All these became all kinds of other things. Chief of Staff Moshe Dayan coming to congratulate them. So such fine people cannot do an unjustifiable wrong. This is the idea. And here you have a song that glorifies our wonderful boys, etc., etc. So you have a whole sign, complex sign of glorification and mythization. Here is the same under this poster with a lurking Arab waiting for Jews to come and kill them all. So what do we learn? We learn that positive outcome for us may condone or overlook evil done to them. Nobody denies it was evil, but it fought for the best, and that empathy is race, religion, ethnicity related. Students learn everything from a Zionist military point of view, so which means they don't learn the historical discourse. This is not the discourse of historians, this is the discourse of manufacturers of collective memory, which is different. And it produces what is called elite racism, a sort of racism that comes from above. You teach racism, nobody's born with racism. You teach racism, and then when they go to the army, they act accordingly. I think this can explain a little bit the behavior of Israeli soldiers, because other than that, they get a very nice humanistic education, all right? And this quote from Zizek, I think it fits because it explains how authorities do these things. They use morals, they use high values in order to do what they want to do. And they know what they are doing, and still they're doing it. So it's not, that's why we say it's motivated. It's not by chance, it's not by accident, it's not always pre-planned, but it is motivated by interest. Okay, I think I stood time.
Thank you very much. What makes the research and the book by Professor Peled so important is that this phenomenon that you have been presented now happens all over the world. You see it in schools in Sarajevo, you see it in schools everywhere, in educational systems, in newspapers, in media. Those who may threaten our security are in different ways dehumanized, often in a very subtle fashion. So peacebuilding starts with using correct words, correct phrases. The famous Secretary General of the United Nations, Dag Hammarskjöld, said, when he was asked what was the most important thing for world peace, he said that people would use words in a correct fashion. And that shows the importance of our own thinking, because we may also, without realizing it, be part of distortions in the way we represent and we think about other people. Now, are there any questions to Professor Peled? Yes, please.
Isn't maybe this development of this national identity maybe kind of a, and this racism kind of a counter effect or natural response to the racism the Jews experienced within centuries before? So that because now they got this own state and this is our territory and now we need to defend this. It's kind of that natural response to what has happened in the past.
Of course, this is it. I think this is the reason, but it's also the excuse. You see? It must be the reason, because Jews have suffered in Europe, not in Arab countries. Huh? In Arab countries, they lived in harmony with the Arabs most of the time. There were no pogroms and things like that, or Holocaust. But since the state was established by Eastern European Jews, of course, this is it. But today, 4 generations later, you cannot have that justified, because what they do, they traumatize the children all the time, year after year, for that. Okay? And you're not an Israeli if you don't have an Auschwitz connection. You know, it's funny, I'm going to tell a funny story. After Gaza, excellent soldiers were given a prize, a trip to Auschwitz. So a friend of my son was given this prize, but he was a Moroccan Jew. He didn't have any Auschwitz, so he went to the neighbors to lend one. Okay, so this is all the time the thing, but they're using it and manipulating it and abusing it. Of course, this is the basis for everything. But we are far away from the basis. We should have worked it out and do something positive. And not go on taking revenge on the wrong people, by the way. Huh? But of course, this is it, psychologically.
Yes, please.
You said in the beginning that your school system has many streams.
Yes.
Were these books scattered throughout all these streams, or what criteria did you use to pick books?
I don't know. As I told you, I picked mainstream secular books, which are the majority.
Okay.
For majority of schools, they are state books, because I didn't want to have any other factors coming in. But these books are used in religious state books. Teachers can, except for the ultra-Orthodox, who are very strict, they can choose books, whatever they want. If it's for the religious one, it says so.
Yes, please.
As I recall what you said about the negative images of Arabs in school, you mentioned that people, at least the children, are guided to become an effective soldier in occupied territory.
Right.
But what is the benefit of the state to keep this negative image for the next generation, to keep in conflict? I don't get that point.
Why do they keep the conflict?
Yeah.
Because they make a lot of money out of it. A lot of people make a lot of money, including each and every state in Europe. So everybody is interested in keeping this conflict going. I mean, we don't make money, but you know, the people who do. So it's very rentable, this kind of situation. And it's what called, I think, retractable conflict. Daniel Bartal calls it like that. It's a conflict that is being perpetuated all the time in order to be kept as conflict. Yeah, and a lot of people have a lot of interest to keep it this way.
Most conflicts continue themselves, and they repeat and repeat and repeat. You see that in Colombia, which is already for 60 years in some various forms of civil war. You saw that in the former Yugoslavia. And the mechanisms differ from country to country, but there is a lot of repetition, and the art of peace building is breaking the cycle, and that starts with changing your thoughts about the others. And of course, the national security threat, which many people in Israel feel, has a great tendency to, in a way, reinforce itself. Because if you live, in your view, in a world full of enemies, then you're very much on your guard, and you emphasize tremendously national security measures and make everybody else be on guard too, and get into a system of thought control which mobilizes the whole nation for this conflict. That's basically also the effect of this educational language, thought control, programming people.
Right. But you see, the people who make the decisions, those who are cynical, they don't think there is a national security threat. When you see archives of arguments, of meetings, of the government, of the army, you never hear these words. It is something they inculcate to others in order to use them as good soldiers. So if you give the enemy a human face, they are not enemies anymore, and there's a lot of literature about this. So you must keep
question.
Yes.
Do many people in Israel agree with you?
No. No, hardly anyone. Really.
That's also my question. What is the reaction of this kind of lecture in Israel?
Huh?
What is the reaction of this reaction?
The reaction. Well, there are various reactions, not so many. I mean, the main reaction is complete ignorance. Another reaction is boycott, ban. I mean, I'm not invited to any major project or conference regarding textbooks.
You must be a Palestinian.
I am an honorary Palestinian. I got this title once in the conference, an honorary Palestinian. And the reactions are not relevant. I mean, they are not to the research, they are to me. So you are not Zionist, huh? Or something like that. Even professors, academics, this is the reaction. But on the other hand, there are some reactions that are different. I was invited now by a major paper in Israel Haaretz to write a series of articles about textbooks, so this is good. You see, society is not homogeneous, but so some people, and it goes all the way to, you know, to exterminate me, but this is not important. The important thing is that I can still teach it, and the students receive it very well, and they go on with it. And I see it in their papers, how but they get the idea, once they see, once they know, they cannot unknow. So they go on with it, and they go on analyzing other books, and this is very important, I guess.
It certainly is. Thank you very much.